Hello everyone, in this video I'll be showing you the ultimate guide on how to play Cyclops in Marvel Rivals. This is a poke character who has some area of effect type attacks that is very powerful. I'll be breaking down the best strategies to get the most out of this hero, as he can turn the tides of battle really easily. You can see picking up easy quad kills. And I'll be honest, as a hit scan character, one of the best things you can do to get better at him is go into the practice range here. I would highly recommend going in and setting the parameters, having the movement speed normal with random movement. After you get comfortable with this, you can put it to basic combat here. And I recommend Spider-Man as a harder to hit character who's a bit smaller. And it's really just putting in the reps, trying to get comfortable at moving targets here, because that's really what you're going to be encountering in a fight. He has many different abilities that can deal with enemies, dealing with either a single target at a time or dealing with multiple. The best thing about Cyclops' kit is the versatility he has and the long range abilities he has too. He also has a lot of mobility that you'd want to use to try and keep your distance as your best attacking from range due to his low damage fall off. I do see that changing in the future, but typically his normal attacks have a 3-round burst. They do 75 damage if you hit all 3 bursts, but the thing is, you have a very nice ricochet blast that you can interrupt your attack with. On PC, this is E, but on console, it's going to be that right one or R1 or right bumper. Your combo is kind of like that. You want to try and weave that in between the attacks there, because that gives you the most amount of damage. It is very bursty, because if you can hit a headshot and then blast away, there is a cooldown, but every time you hit a target with your attacks here, you're regaining the cooldown on your Ricochet Force there. So you want to be using that as much as possible. Don't forget about it. And you do have an alternative fire here, which is going to be a little bit less damage per second. However, this is good because you have an 8-round burst before he has to reload his eyes, so you can kind of swap between the two of these here if you need to finish a target off. It does have a 22-meter range, which is not always the highest, but you can bounce it off of places here and get pretty lucky, especially if you're great with math. Now, typically as Cyclops, you do want to use your main attack as much as possible, because you do get less damage per second if you're using your beam here, but it depends on the situation you're in. When there's a lot of enemies around, sometimes you can pick up easy kills with going with your alternate fire there, as strategists may be tank or healing their tanks and be low on health, and you can finish them off this way. It also, I find, makes enemies spread out, kind of similar to Moon Knight, allowing you to 1v1 them a little bit better. He is great as a flank because of all the mobility that he has and the ability to get up high. And typically enemies or players in this game don't like to look up at the sky, because you'll be floating whenever you use that ability there. And you don't even have to use your ability. Anytime you get height, if you're jumping off a building, you can use your ability here to give yourself a bit of a slowdown on the way down. But and the thing about Ricochet Force is it's actually kind of interesting. You got a lot of damage fall off if you don't end up hitting a target, but if you do hit a target, it has a 65% damage fall off. If you hit the ground, it has a 50% damage fall off. So sometimes, most times, you're going to want to shoot this at a target, obviously, but you can end up, if you miss your shots, taking an enemy that way. So to give you an idea, if you shoot your beam there, you can see it does that much damage, versus if you're shooting it off a target, obviously they're taking a lot more damage. Typically, you're going to want to try and shoot it at a target that you're not going to miss with, and if you can, it's best to go after a strategist and combine those together. So general flow, go with your main attack, follow up with that, and then you can beam it off of another target here and then focus on your next attack there. Now, getting onto our mobility. So there's the Optic Ascent here, which lets you push yourself up, and you get an increased movement speed when you're in the air there for a couple seconds. What's also cool about this is you can blast away at a target. It's going to give them a bit of a slow, so this can be useful for getting away. It does very minimal damage, but sometimes it can be just enough to deal with a target. But you see there, you want to use that. Typically, this ability is used as like a getaway, and then you get up high and use your Optic Beam here to just blast away, because you fall slowly with this. So having both of his mobilities on a 12-second cooldown may end up getting nerfed at some point, but it is a good way to, you know, find off angles to take out targets here. You typically want to use this as, like, you want to save at least one of your mobility tools as a getaway. Always be looking at your cooldowns though, because that is kind of your way of getting away. You don't want to get stuck in a situation where you can't escape. Now, we also have Propulsion burst here, so you can use this as a bit of a mobility tool, as you see there, and you can move back and forth between it. Sometimes enemies are going to have a hard time with tracking you when you're doing that. It doesn't do a whole lot of damage, it's 5 per second, similar to our Optic blast there. So while it's a good tool to get away from targets, you have to be mindful of keeping at least one cooldown for if you end up getting a diver on you, because that is, like, one, obviously as a poke character, one of your weaknesses. But it does apply a slow on the target for 2 seconds, so they'll move 35% slower, which is great great because you can use it as a getaway and then go ahead with blasting. Be careful though, because you can bounce off of walls. As you saw there, it slid me up even higher into the air. So if you're doing it on a map like Clintyre, you can fall off the map really easily. That's one of the only downsides to it. I like to jump a little bit beforehand, gives you a bit of extra distance, but again, be mindful that you can take yourself out really easy while doing that. And for Cyclops' ult, this has some crazy range and damage. It actually has a 60-meter range, so if you're used to using your blast here, it's going to be 3 times the range of that. But what it does is 75 damage plus 20% maximum health, and then it does another attack after 1.1 seconds that does 75 damage plus 40% of max health, which most enemies that get taken by this are likely going down just if they get hit with both the blast here. If they're not getting pocketed, you can take certain healers out like Cloak and Dagger, but it is a little bit challenging to do that. It's probably best if your team is also paying attention and going ahead with that. But you want to find ways to use this, like in hallways, like the Wakanda domination map. There's actually a really good spot near the spawn that you can use this, as the enemy doesn't really have any way of getting away from it with their mobility. And the first attack only has a 2-meter width, and then the second one has an 8-meter width. And you can see it actually hits really far, as you can see climb up the walls there. Now, shield tanks can avoid that and jump and shield downwards like Doctor Strange to avoid it, but typically, if a tank is in that range, they're getting blasted and taken out by it if they don't escape with some of their mobility, and you can't jump over it. Some abilities like Doctor Strange's fly can help out, but it is a tough one to dodge. This is mostly due to him not having an ult line. He just goes rah, so maybe they'll add something like Optic Blast to it just to make it easier, but yeah, it can be a sneaky ultimate. I also find success in flanking with this, as the enemies sometimes just don't really pay attention to where it's at, and if you can find the off angle here, just be mindful it only has that 8-meter width whenever you blast away with it. Now, your headshot damage is pretty great, so things like Dino you're a pretty good counter to, but anytime that you see other pokes like Cyclops here, it's best to go ahead with that. You saw I did the main attack there and then followed up with my E ability, which was enough to clear them out. I've had games where I've had over 50% headshot accuracy just because there's devil dinos. That's not typically a good way to play just because you're feeding the healers ults. As Cyclops, it's typically best to go for healers and other DPS, especially other dives here. But don't be afraid to go after, like, for example, this devil dino here. He was grabbing our Magneto, did not want that to happen. It's easy takeout. And if your aim is really good, you can kind of hang out where the healers are just to make sure that they're not getting hit with any dive, because you can slow targets and you can give a bit of a pushback, and you just have so much high damage that you can deal with targets really easily like that. Funny, but Magneto's ultimate, that was our team there. You can actually deal with Magneto because it doesn't absorb your attacks there, so that's one nice thing about you. But you typically, as you saw there, I took out a Cloak and Dagger. You want to try and deal with their healers as much as possible, and any of their DPS that are, you know, stragglers. But slow tanks like Penny, you're also really good against, just because it's easy to get shots off on them, and you can kind of use your Optic Blast and your beams to be able to take out targets really easily. I had a Mantis damage boost right here, which is great for able to get a triple off the Penny, a healer, and then their Cyclops. The 3-round burst attack is pretty funny though, because as you can see, this target's running away. I was able to get a few of the last bursts off on them. And an optimal time to use your ultimate, like there's a Invisible Woman ult there. After it ended, it was great because everyone's grouped up, was able to pick off a target just like that. And we had the amplifier there, so easy to remove as Cyclops due to your burst doing so much damage. So yeah, 75 on those bursts, and you get your Optic charges back pretty quickly. You can see there, you want to weave those Optic blasts in between your right bumper or E ability. And if there's a lot of dive happening, again, don't be afraid to stick with your healers there if your aim is really good, because you can still contribute by hitting targets, because your range fall off is really good on Cyclops. So yeah, and you got so much mobility if you need to dive back. Your Optic beam there is just so good, because you can see there, sometimes even just missing, I hit it off the wall, I was able to take out one of their DPS pretty easily. So yeah, you just have so many capabilities when it comes to combat. You can shred tanks, especially due to hitting their head on targets like Penny, Dino, Hulk, even Thing is really hard countered by you. Now here's an example of a great spot to do an ultimate here. Just because there were so many targets grouped up, they had to counter ult to deal with that, because otherwise they were going down. But you can apply a lot of pressure between single target poke damage on like strategists here, also using your beams to be able to bounce between multiple targets there. He's very powerful in a lot of different situations here, and it's just great whenever you got a lot of strategists in an area. And one thing Cyclops does very well is when the team is distracted, like you can see here, you can just get in and get a lot of really easy kills, just because flanking is one thing he does well. With the beams flying everywhere, it can confuse a lot of people. And again, Cyclops is just really good at dealing with targets that are far away due to low damage fall-offs. You can see there's another Cyclops that just got taken out really easily. So go hit the practice range and you'll be able to dominate as Cyclops in Marvel Rivals. If this video is useful, please hit the subscribe button below. We'll catch you in the next one.